Hey, I'm Scott Kirzner, and I moderate and organize a lot of panel discussions over the course of the year. Recently, I went to one where my job was just to sit in the audience and listen, and it was a great way to analyze things from that perspective. Here's what I saw: 5 things I'd give kudos for, and 5 things that could have been better.
This panel had a really diverse group of panelists. It had men, women, people of color. It can feel like a lot of extra effort. It can be really challenging around particular topics, but it is totally worth it. Your audience cares. You should care. Your panelists will appreciate it. But there were only 2 microphones for 4 speakers. Anytime you have to hand the microphones around, or panelists and moderators are looking at each other, trying to figure out who wants the microphone and who's going to go next, it slows down the pacing. It makes it awkward, much less conversational. You always want to have the same number of microphones as you do speakers, maybe even one extra for that microphone that's going to go on the fritz. This room had great lighting, and that's not always the case in hotel ballrooms and convention centers. It was awesome that no one was in the shadows. You could see people's faces and their facial expressions really clearly. But when I went to the back of the room, it was hard to see speakers when you were sitting down in the back rows. I almost always feel like if the stage could be a little taller, if the chairs could be a little taller, that's always a good thing. You want to see as much of the speakers as you can. And also, don't ever block them with a table or a dais. It makes things look really old-fashioned and conservative. Was glad that they didn't do that at this panel. They had a nice slide that listed the names of the speakers and the moderator. But if you create that kind of slide, you need to do something really simple, but people forget to do this. Ask the speakers to sit in that order. And then it's like you've got a roster or a playbill up on the screen that shows you who's speaking. And audiences spend a lot of time trying to figure out who was it that made that point? Who was it that asked that question? The slide could really help remind people who they're looking at. This moderator was really good at integrating questions from the audience, and that's not always the case. Sometimes moderators seem to forget that the audience is there. They're not looking at the audience. They don't see people leaning forward or raising their hands to ask a question. This happens a lot, but the front row turned into a buffer zone. It was empty seats between the panelists and the audience rather than seating for actual human beings. Whatever you can do to get people to sit in that front row, your event staff, other speakers. Sometimes I literally have used prizes, free books, a bag of candy, a tchotchke in the front row. And then when you start the session or you start the day, to remind people that you want the A students sitting in the front row, and maybe you're even going to bribe them to sit there. This panel was about manufacturing in Massachusetts. These panelists brought really good stories and anecdotes to help the audience relate to the topic. You always want to have concrete things that people can connect with as opposed to lots of abstract ideas. These panelists did a great job of that. But, and this was my biggest issue with the panel, no one on the event team, no one in the room felt authorized to tell the speakers or moderator when they were speaking too quietly or holding the mic too far from their mouth. And people put so much energy into organizing panels and making them great. You need to make sure that the audience can hear what is going on stage. Otherwise, they tune out. They start checking email. They start sending text messages. It's a tragedy.
We aim to be a global company. And so it's not just customers in the U.S.
What else do you think makes panels really good or really bad? Post a comment below. I would love to hear your take.